From WBUR Boston, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. The name alone, Noam Chomsky, draws a line through almost any crowd. If you're with him, you're ready to shake the system, to question just about every mainstream assumption on politics, power, the economy. Funny thing is, it's Tea Partiers shaking the system right now, and Chomsky, Lord of the Left, is both sympathetic and afraid. These are serious times. This hour On Point, a conversation with Noam Chomsky on America and the world. You can join the conversation. What's your question today for Noam Chomsky? Is he your go-to theorist, your bête noire? Even if you don't agree with him, do you respect him, his life's work? You can also comment at our website, onpointradio.org, or on Twitter and Facebook at onpointradio. Joining me now in the studio is Noam Chomsky, legendary intellectual and social critic, professor emeritus of linguistics at MIT. His latest book is Hopes and Prospects. Other big works include Manufacturing, Consent, Failed States, and Hegemony or Survival. Noam Chomsky, welcome back to On Point.
Glad to be with you again.
Yeah, it's several years now, 2006, since you last sat in that chair. My, oh my, how much has happened in that time.
Quite a lot.
And just in the last couple of year and some, the Tea Party. Share your thoughts about it. I'm looking here. You were in Madison, Wisconsin, talking about the Tea Party, what it represents, and I found it a very interesting, and I get this is just a few months ago, a very interesting combination of things. On the one hand, you were saying, don't take this lightly, give this, upset the respect it deserves, but also you express real fear, even fear of fascism here.
Well, I think we first of all should make a distinction between, and I tried to do it in that talk, between the Tea Party itself, movement, in quotes, not much of a movement, but actual participants and
lots of people,
members.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relatively small group, moderately affluent, not very representative of the country, highly funded, so very prominent, and given enormous media attention. So that's one segment. Mm-hmm. The other, and I think more significant group, is those maybe half the population who pretty much resonates to what they take to be their message.
The Tea Party message.
What they take to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're misunderstanding it. But there's considerable resonance in the country. It shows up in polls and so on. And that segment, say, half the population, really is representative of a lot of the country. Those are people with real grievances. A lot of them are working class, lower middle class. Mm-hmm. For about 30 years, they have seen their incomes pretty much stagnate, working hours going way up, far behind Europe, above Europe, benefits, which were always fairly weak here, declining. They just went through a shattering catastrophe with an $8 trillion housing bubble burst that, for many of them, was most of their assets. And they're facing unemployment is way up in some domain, like, say, manufacturing industry, which is really the core of an economy, is just collapsing. I mean, manufacturing, unemployment in manufacturing is at depression levels. And furthermore, there isn't much prospect of those jobs coming back. And these people see that there's tremendous wealth in the country, but very highly concentrated. Inequality has soared to maybe the highest level ever.
Headlines today, highest level ever. Record gap between rich and poor this morning.
Well, you can see it. I mean, and it's a very small part of the population which is accumulating the wealth that has been produced in the last 30 years, while for most of the population it's not third world poverty, but it's not what they have a right to expect. And it leads to a lot of bitterness. They'd like answers, and they're not getting any answers.
You say half the country, then, may be resonating to what they take the Tea Party message to be. What do you think they're hearing? Whatever you think the message may actually be at its heart, we'll look at that. But what do you think they're hearing that they're resonating with from the Tea Party movement?
What they're hearing is every institution is rotten. The government doesn't do anything for us. The corporations don't. The parties aren't doing anything. Actually, antagonism toward the Republican Party is even higher than toward the Democrats. They want Congress should be thrown out and started over again. They have resentment against professions. They don't believe scientists. Everything isn't working. That's what they hear from the Tea Party movement. They don't hear anything constructive, but it does. And the trouble is they're not hearing anything constructive from anyone else. So the Democrats are not telling them, look, we understand your problem, and it's because of the financialization of the economy, which we supported and we created.
Wall Street centric.
Okay, so they're not going to tell them that. The Republicans are, by now, the Republicans are barely a political party in the traditional sense, and some of what's coming along there is really frightening. But the Tea Party message of against power, against institutions, and so on. It's about the only message they're hearing.
I was struck in your comments there in Madison, as they're reported anyway. You're saying, now look, people, and maybe you're talking to American liberals here. If you look out at the Tea Party, what circle of resonance, and say, what a bunch of yahoos, how ridiculous, how nutty, you're making a big mistake.
It is, because we should. I mean, you can say that about Sharon Angle, if you like.
Harry Reid's opponent.
Yeah. But the real question is, who's responding in whatever way they are to those kind of what amount to cries for help? And those people should not be ridiculed. They should be organized. They should be the kind of people who in the 1930s, under somewhat similar conditions, reacted in a very constructive way and compelled the government to institute the New Deal measures, which were not superb, but they did save the country from a very serious crisis.
You're 81 now. You're old enough to have a kind of memory of that time. And yet I read you saying that you've never seen anger and fear in this country of the type that you see now. There was a lot of fear in the 1930s. There was certainly anger swirling around. Yeah. What's different now in this country?
Well, I was a child, so it's childhood memories. But most of my family was working class at that time, unemployed. New York, things objectively they were much poorer than working people today.
No flat screen TVs.
But but on the other hand, it was a kind of a hopeful period. It wasn't. You didn't sense, at least I don't remember sensing, the kind of despair that you see now, the kind of anger. I mean, you may have found it somewhere, like John Steinbeck's
Grapes of Wrath, Terrain,
and so on. But among the urban working class, large part of the population, my impression is that there was hopefulness. We can do something. The CIO is organizing. There's
labor
pressure.
Movement.
There's a labor movement. We can get to, which is the labor movement is more than just let's have jobs. It's an educational process. So, for example, my unemployed seamstress aunts got a week in the country from the union.
Education and social circles.
It's social circles, educational circles, workers' education. There was a remarkably high cultural level, in fact, but a sense that there's something we can do. It's going to get better.
And now?
Now there's a sense of real despair and anger. Nothing's going to work. Nothing. No hope for the future. We just have to get rid of everything, but not replace it by anything.
You say respect the despair of people who are feeling it now. You say respect it and do something about it, but you also point to it with a very significant element of fear. You've seen how that kind of despair can go in other times and other places.
Well, in that talk, actually, I did mention an analogy, one that I don't think we should take too seriously, but we should also not overlook. The analogy is the obvious one. Germany in the 1920s and early 30s. And we should remember that Germany in the 1920s, Weimar Germany, that was actually the peak of Western civilization. In the sciences, the arts, it was a model of democracy, huge labor movement, a lot of political activism. But within a few years, in 1928, the Nazis, there was an election, the Nazis had few percent of the vote. In 1933, they were so powerful that the Hindenburg president was compelled to select Hitler as his chancellor. He hated him. He had contempt for him, class contempt and everything else, but there was just too much popular support. Well, within 10 years, Germany went from the peak of Western civilization to the depths of barbarism, maybe in modern history. And the fundamental reason is that the center collapsed. People lost any respect, many people, for the major political parties that had governed the Third Reich. They couldn't stand the bickering in Parliament. They felt that Germany was being badly treated. The national pride. I mean, the Depression hit, but it was happening before that. And what happened is a charismatic figure arose and succeeded in mobilizing masses of the population with consequences that we know. And in fact, I'm old enough to remember that too.
I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. We're talking this hour with legend of the left, Noam Chomsky, about his big take on our moment. President Obama, economic crisis, Tea Party, war. You were just saying, looking back to German history, the Weimar Republic, ultimately the rise of Hitler, that charismatic figure. You said that we've been lucky so far about the charismatic figures who have and have not risen in this country. What do you mean?
Actually, I've felt that all my life. If you take a look at the culture of the society, which is pretty unusual, it's different from others in many respects, and there is a lot of anger and fear. It's been a very frightened country since colonial days, in fact. You can see it in literature and culture and so on. We're very lucky that no honest, charismatic figure has arisen.
Honest?
Well, everyone who arose was a thug and corrupt. Joe McCarthy, the religious leaders, others, Nixon, so corrupt that they couldn't mobilize the population. They collapsed. If we got an honest, charismatic figure like Hitler, he wasn't corrupt. He was honest. He was a monster, but he had a message which meant something to the population. And by 1939. Estimates are that about 90% of Germans supported him.
What about the charismatic figures then on our horizon right now? I mean, you'd have to say there's Glenn Beck. We saw the big rally in Washington. There's, in Radioland, there's Rush Limbaugh. Maybe there's Sarah Palin. There's President Barack Obama. Talk about charisma. He had it in spades in his presidential campaign.
Barack Obama is, frankly, I never liked him much from the beginning. It was, but... a
lot of Americans did. They put him right in the White House.
They liked the aura. You probably know that Obama won the award from the advertising industry in 2008 for the best marketing campaign of the year. And executives in the industry were euphoric. They said he's going to change the tone. In fact, what they said is, we've been marketing candidates kind of like commodities ever since Reagan. And this is our greatest achievement ever. It's going to change the atmosphere in corporate boardrooms and so on. But that's paper thin. And as soon as the pleasant rhetoric was not realized in action, or was realized in action in ways that harmed people, it began to decline.
Hold the president aside for just a moment, if you would. What about on the right, charismatic figures there today?
Well, they're there, I spend a lot of time, when I'm driving, I listen to talk radio. You get an interesting sense of part of the public. Not so much for the radio hosts.
But the callers.
The callers give you an interesting feeling about some segment of the population. But, it's just hard to take those people seriously. I mean, yes, they're there, but they're not. Glenn Beck isn't going to organize a popular movement. He's not going